You always knew there were eyes upon you. Not the eyes of people in the room, nor the glances of those who judged you openly, but a silence that followed you deeper than sound itself. In the moments when cruelty unfolded, when words sliced sharper than any blade, when laughter was used not as joy but as a weapon, something else was there, unmoving, recording. They thought their secrets dissolved in the dark. They believed their betrayals would vanish in the air, carried away like ash. But nothing was lost. The shadows remember, and those quiet eyes never closed. You felt it in your bones, even when you couldn't explain it, that sense of being watched. Not by human witnesses, but by something older, something that measured pain with a scale beyond comprehension. You wondered if it was madness, if your imagination had sharpened itself against the walls of loneliness. But it wasn't madness, it was recognition. Because when the world stripped you down, when you stood powerless against the cruelty of others, there was an unseen ledger writing in silence. Each wound carved into your soul was marked, each humiliation pressed into stone. You were not abandoned, you were being studied. The cruel lived in illusions of freedom. They thought no one noticed the masks they wore, the poisons they fed in small, invisible doses. They mistook silence for absence, mistook restraint for weakness. They moved as if they were kings, staging private dramas where their cruelty reigned supreme. But kings without thrones are only actors, and actors eventually face an audience. They never saw the curtain being drawn. You did. That is why their confidence always felt hollow to you. You sensed their steps were echoes already, hollow sounds leading toward a judgment they could not escape. There is a reason silence unsettles the guilty. It is not just the absence of noise, it is the weight of presence. The longer the eyes remained hidden, the heavier the truth became. They laughed loudly, desperate to drown out what they could not name, but their laughter never reached you. You heard something else behind it, the stillness of justice waiting, like a predator crouched just beyond the edge of sight, like the breath before thunder splits the sky. You did not need to strike back because you understood what they could not. That patience is not submission, but preparation. Every cruelty you endured planted a seed, not of despair, but of revelation. For while they thought themselves safe behind locked doors and whispered conspiracies, you stood inside a theater where every act was illuminated under an unseen flame. You knew that what is done in secret is not truly secret. You felt it long before proof ever surfaced. And now, as the quiet eyes continue to watch, as they mark each subtle betrayal with precision, the cruel approach a precipice they cannot see. You, who bore their shadows in silence, stand on the edge of something vast. You know the watchers have not forgotten. You know the silence is not passive. It is the sound of power gathering, waiting for the moment when shadows themselves will turn against those who believed them blind. They built their cruelty like architects of a hidden empire. Brick by brick, lie by lie, they constructed walls around themselves, towering illusions meant to dwarf anyone who dared question their authority. You watched them sculpt their kingdoms from whispers, from shadows, from the bloodless knives of manipulation. They did not raise weapons you could see. Instead, they bent reality itself, rewriting stories, reshaping memories, convincing others that wrong was right, that pain was deserved, that their hands were clean. And yet, in the quiet places of your mind, you always knew. Their laughter was too sharp, their victories too hollow. Their smiles concealed the teeth of predators who fed on silence. They thrived on powerlessness, yours, anyone's. It was never about strength, only control. They learned how to twist a pause into intimidation, how to turn a glance into a command. They mastered the psychology of cruelty like a sacred text, memorizing each page until they became the scripture themselves. To them, kindness was weakness, doubt was prey, vulnerability was a confession they could weaponize, and so they wove their games in silence, wrapping people in invisible chains, chains so fine that even those enslaved sometimes mistook them for comfort. But every architecture reveals its secret in time. A palace of mirrors cannot hold when the light shifts. Their cruelty was not random. It was systematic, deliberate, rehearsed like a performance meant to glorify their control. You saw the patterns even when others did not. The same words recycled, the same gestures repeated, the same subtle strategies to isolate, to divide, to conquer. They were predictable in their arrogance, convinced that nobody could see the blueprints of their cruelty. But you saw when they built a pedestal only to shove someone off it. You saw when they crafted alliances like scaffolding, designed not to support but to collapse at their choosing. You saw how their empire was never made of stone, it was paper, soaked in arrogance, waiting for the fire, and yet the cruelty did not only destroy others, it reshaped you. It taught you how to read the silence between words, how to hear the venom beneath the compliments, how to sense the storm before the clouds gathered. While they believed they were gods, you became something sharper, an observer who learned survival not through submission but through knowledge. They thought they broke you, but in truth they carved your sight into a blade. You were not crushed by their architecture. You became the flaw in its design, the crack that would one day widen until the whole structure fell. For cruelty is not infinite. Every wall they built to imprison others also became a prison for themselves. Every lie they spoke became a thread in a noose they could not see tightening. And while they congratulated themselves on their brilliance, their control, their mastery, a greater architect was watching, the architect of return, of consequence, of justice. Their empire was vast in appearance but hollow in substance. And though they moved as though invincible, the ground beneath them had already begun to fracture. They just couldn't hear it yet. ChatGPT said, they thought silence was their shield. They laughed in dark rooms, speaking cruelty, as if no ear could hear, as if the walls themselves had sworn loyalty to their lies. But silence is not emptiness. It is an archive. It remembers. And while their voices echoed with arrogance, there were whispers moving through the stillness, brushing against their skin in ways they could not name. At night, when they lay in the counterfeit safety of their power, they felt it. The weight pressing against their chest, the sudden chill along their spine, the eyes they could not see but could never dismiss. You know this sensation. You felt it when truth stood just beyond reach, when the air thickened and the room seemed to tilt as if some invisible witness had entered. That was not paranoia. That was the silent ledger being written. Every act of cruelty leaves residue, not just on the victim, but on the world itself. The air remembers the broken cries. Floors creaked differently where lies were spoken. And though they mocked you, convincing themselves their games would vanish into shadows, there were watchers who gathered fragments like shattered glass, fitting them into a pattern too precise for chance. The cruel mistook stillness for absence, but stillness is the camouflage of judgment. When the whispers began, they were not heard with ears, but with the body. A slip of memory, a repeated nightmare, the sense that something long forgotten was clawing its way to the surface. That is how justice first arrives, quiet, cryptic, undeniable. Their arrogance begins to falter in these moments. You see it. The hesitation in their eyes when laughter should be easy. The way their words suddenly fail to land with force, as if gravity itself has turned against them. They begin to notice the pattern, doors closing without sound, the timing of accidents too perfect, allies pulling away with no explanation. They do not call it justice, not yet. They call it coincidence, bad luck, stress. But beneath their denial, they know. Some part of them recognizes that the same silence they exploited has turned against them. It no longer hides them, it stalks them. For you, this silence is different. It does not suffocate, it sharpens. You feel the atmosphere shifting, an ancient balance moving into alignment. You, who endured without retaliation, find yourself seeing clearer than before. Betrayal once clouded you in confusion, but now the haze is lifting, replaced with a clarity you could never summon in your moments of weakness. You recognize the whispers not as threats, but as signals. Each one is confirmation that their cruelty has been weighed and found heavy. You are not powerless in this silence. You are its chosen witness. The cruel do not yet understand that their empire of shadows has already been condemned. They mistake the absence of thunder for mercy, but thunder is only the announcement. Lightning strikes first in the unseen distance, splitting sky from earth before the crowd even notices the storm. That is where you are now, watching the horizon fracture, hearing the faint whispers swelling into omens. They cannot escape it. They cannot bribe it. They cannot unsee the eyes that never closed. Their cruelty is unraveling in the same silence they once believed would protect them. And soon, what was whispered in the darkness will be declared beneath the unrelenting light. They thought the walls they built were eternal. They thought the mask they wore could never slip. For years, their cruelty hid in plain sight. Camouflaged by charm, cloaked by false smiles, shielded by the blindness of those who wanted comfort more than truth. But cracks always appear first in silence, small and delicate, like fractures in glass that no one notices until it's too late. And now you see it, the shift, the unraveling, a stutter in their voice where once there was certainty, a nervous glance where once there was arrogance. The first tremors of collapse are subtle, but they echo louder than thunder to the one who has endured in silence. The cruel do not know it yet, but their performance is bleeding at the edges. One misplaced word, one unguarded expression, one careless slip in the presence of someone who remembers. The perfect narrative they wove begins to fray, thread by thread, revealing the jagged truth beneath. You notice how their allies start to question them, how suspicion flickers across eyes that once followed without doubt. They feel it too, the sensation of being watched, not by human eyes alone, but by something greater. The weight of hidden observation presses against their shoulders, bending their posture, darkening their aura. It begins small, a document left open, a message forwarded to the wrong recipient, a contradiction exposed in a room full of ears. What they thought invisible suddenly has edges sharp enough to cut. Their lies, once polished and rehearsed, now stumble. Their cruelty, once veiled, now trembles in the light of unintended exposure. Every secret kingdom falls the same way, not in a single explosion, but in the soft collapse of hidden corners, one after another, until the center cannot hold. You feel it as justice sharpening its blade in silence. Their laughter doesn't carry the same strength anymore. It cracks in the middle, thin, brittle, hollow. The crowd doesn't laugh with them as before. Instead, they exchange glances, quiet and heavy, the kind of silence that suffocates, and that silence is louder than any accusation. You have waited for this, watching as their fortress of deceit was built stone by stone. Now, those stones tremble beneath their feet. The same power they used to suffocate others begins to turn against them, like a serpent biting the hand that fed it. This is the paradox of cruelty. It always carries its own undoing, like ancient carvings warning of curses in forgotten temples. Every act of hidden malice carries an inscription of downfall etched deep within it. They ignored the writing. They mocked the watchers. They believed consequence was only for the weak. But you know the truth. You see the tremors for what they are, omens. Their empire is no longer unshakable. It is fragile, brittle, screaming in silence for collapse. And though they scramble to repair the cracks, though they try to laugh louder, speak bolder, and move faster, you can see it in their eyes. The secret is out. The unraveling has begun. They thought no one was watching. They believed their cruelty would dissolve into the silence, swallowed by shadows too deep to echo back. But silence was never absence. It was patience. And patience has a way of gathering strength, like fire building in the heart of a mountain. Now the mountain is cracking. What was hidden in their private chambers is bleeding into daylight, and you can feel the tremor in the air as though the sky itself is preparing to speak. The first strike is subtle, almost merciful. A misplaced word, a message forwarded to the wrong eyes, a truth slipping from their lips without their consent. Small sparks, easily denied, easily laughed off. Yet you see it, the tremors behind their smile, the flicker of fear in their eyes when they realize the fortress they built of lies is no longer sealed. Something ancient has pressed its hand against their glass walls, and the cracks are spreading faster than they can patch. Their names are spoken now, not in whispers, but in full-throated accusations. Once they stood above you untouchable, armored in arrogance and power. Now their armor is a coffin, weighing them down as the flames of exposure rise higher. You watch as the very tools they once used against others. The false narratives, the manipulations, the forged alliances, turn back against them, like wolves that finally taste the blood of their master. Every betrayal they committed in secret is replayed in front of those who once applauded them. This is not coincidence. This is orchestration. It does not come with thunder. It comes with precision. A carefully timed meeting where their schemes are revealed. A witness they thought was gone stepping into the light. A revelation written across headlines they cannot silence. Their downfall feels almost scripted, as though some hidden architect has been writing this tragedy line by line, waiting for the curtain to rise. And now the theater is packed, every eye fixed on them. Every heart eager to watch the cruel become spectacle. You notice how quickly admiration curdles into disgust. The crowd that once obeyed now recoils. Their allies, desperate to save themselves, sharpen their knives and plunge them without hesitation. Betrayal devours betrayal until those who once thrived in shadows are left begging for the shadows to return. But shadows do not protect them anymore. They expose them, they magnify them, they brand their shame in fire across the sky so there can be no forgetting. And you, the one who endured in silence, finally see justice not as an abstract promise, but as a living force. It is not gentle, it does not knock politely. It drags the guilty into the square and forces them to choke on their own venom before a watching world. Every secret scream they ignored, every wound they mocked, every weakness they exploited, it all returns. Not in whispers, not in secrecy, in fire, in spectacle. In the merciless poetry of exposure, you realize then that the divine does not need swords to punish. It only needs time, and time has delivered them to the stage they thought they owned, stripped bare, trembling, and burning in the very light they feared most. This is not coincidence. This is consequence. This is the handwriting of heaven, carved in flames they cannot escape. They thought no one saw them. They thought the walls of secrecy were made of stone, thick enough to bury their cruelty forever. But now the walls are crumbling, and the sound is deafening. The stage they once commanded with arrogance has become their prison, and the spotlight, merciless, unblinking, burns hotter than fire. You see it unfold as though time itself has slowed the faces of the guilty twisting, voices cracking, their once polished masks collapsing into raw panic. The crowd stares. The silence of victims has become the roar of witnesses. Every hidden betrayal is dragged into daylight, replayed with precision, as if written into the fabric of fate itself. Their hands shake when once they struck without hesitation. Their words stumble when once they sliced through air with venomous confidence. You feel the atmosphere thicken, charged with a justice that no army could halt. These are not small accidents or minor embarrassments. This is divine theater. The same mouths that laughed at your pain now plead for understanding. The same eyes that looked through you now dart desperately, searching for escape. But there is no escape because the reckoning is not human, it is cosmic. What is happening cannot be negotiated, cannot be undone, cannot be silenced. You recognize the reversal instantly because you lived through their shadow. You remember the corridors where they whispered lies, the rooms where they engineered shame, the dark corners where your voice was muted. And now, in front of those same corridors, those same rooms, those same people, they tremble. The empire they built out of manipulation collapses, piece by piece, in front of everyone. It does not fall quietly. It crashes like thunder, echoing through the very spaces where they once declared themselves untouchable. The witnesses lean closer. The air holds the weight of centuries, as though this moment has been foretold since the beginning. You see symbols of judgment everywhere, in the shaking of their voices, in the unraveling of their lies, in the way even the shadows seem to pull away from them. And you realize this truth: humiliation is the mirror of cruelty. What they inflicted in secret returns to them in multiplied form, carved into their reputation, etched into their legacy. They are no longer feared. They are dissected, pitied, despised. You feel it not as triumph, but as prophecy fulfilled. Their downfall is not random. It is a law, ancient and absolute. And the law is this: whatever is buried will rise, whatever is hidden will surface, and whoever feasts on silence will eventually choke on the noise of exposure. You watch them unravel, and you understand something deeper than revenge. This is not simply their ending. It is the restoration of balance, the recentering of scales long tipped in the dark. Their cruelty was once a fortress. Now it is rubble. Their power was once unquestioned. Now it is mocked. The very people they deceived whisper with recognition. Their eyes no longer clouded, their minds no longer controlled. And you, once silent, once doubted, are no longer invisible. You stand in the light, watching the reckoning unfold, not as a victim, but as a witness chosen by time itself. For so long you carried the weight of silence like chains hidden beneath your skin. You watched cruelty unfold in dimly lit corridors where no one defended you, where voices turned away, and where your endurance became your only shield. They mistook your quiet for weakness, your patience for surrender, your survival for submission. But what they never understood was that silence is not the absence of power. It is the storing of it. Every moment you endured, every humiliation you swallowed whole, every shadow you learned to breathe within was a silent rehearsal for the turning of the scales. Now, as their empire crumbles in public flame, the balance shifts. The same silence that once suffocated you now roars like a storm. Where once your voice was drowned out, now the echo of truth amplifies louder than their carefully constructed lies. You see them tremble, forced to taste the venom they poured into others. Their collapse is not quick. It is stretched, drawn out, so that every onlooker witnesses the unraveling. And in this spectacle you rise, not with vengeance in your hands, but with a new gravity in your eyes. For the crown of the survivor is invisible but undeniable, and no one who sees you now can deny the power hidden in your endurance. The scales tip slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, like the shifting of ancient stone. But then the weight of everything you carried presses down on their side with crushing inevitability. Their secrets, once guarded, are now written across the sky like fire. Their smirks, once dripping with superiority, melt into a desperate plea for a mercy they never gave. And you once cast aside, now stand at the center of a reckoning you never asked for but always knew would come. Your silence has become prophecy, your survival a weapon sharper than any blade. You understand something they never will. Strength is not in domination, but in restraint. They flexed loudly and decayed quietly. You suffered quietly and now rise unshakably. That contrast is divine design, a script written long before you were betrayed. In the turning of the scales, you see not only their fall, but your rebirth. Every scar becomes a sigil, every wound a mark of initiation, as though you have been forged in fire they thought would consume you. But the fire did not consume you, it refined you. There is an ancient symbol hidden here, older than words, the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. What they inflicted circles back, gnawing at their own empire, devouring them from within. And what you endured has looped into transformation, turning victim into witness, witness into sovereign. You no longer walk with bowed head. You no longer wonder if anyone sees. The scales announce it for you. The watchers have declared it. The silence is over, the balance restored. Now you stand in the ruins of what they built, not as the forgotten casualty they expected, but as the proof that no cruelty escapes the ledger of consequence. Your silence was never weakness. It was patience wearing the mask of shadows. And in this moment, as the scales finally tilt, you realize that survival was the loudest victory of all. You have always known there are laws that no courtroom, no politician, no clever liar can escape. They are not written in books nor carved into stone, but pressed into the marrow of existence itself. When cruelty is done in silence, when betrayal is whispered where no one can hear, the guilty convince themselves that the night is blind. But the night is never blind. The shadows keep their records, and the silence stores every scream it swallows. You feel it when you are alone, that weight pressing against your chest, the truth that nothing passes unnoticed. Those who laughed at your pain believed time would protect them. They mistook delay for forgiveness. They mistook patience for weakness. But time is not mercy, time is the staging ground. It allows the web to tighten, the evidence to gather, the silent watchers to finish their work. And when the hour strikes, the return is never equal to the cruelty. It is greater, sharper, heavier. What was hidden in secret becomes declared in public. What was done in the shadows is dragged into merciless light. And those who once thrived on your silence are now crushed by the echo of their own actions. You recognize the pattern. It is not random. It is not chaos. It is the law of return, eternal, unbending, absolute. The betrayer becomes the betrayed. The manipulator becomes the exposed. The predator becomes prey. Their downfall carries the same shape as their sins, twisted back upon them with mathematical precision. They mocked weakness, and now their strength collapses. They used lies as shields, and now their words are chains. They stood above others with stolen crowns, and now they kneel in front of the very eyes they once dismissed. The symmetry is brutal, and it is perfect. And you, who carried the weight of their cruelty, who endured the silent nights where no one defended you, you now see what endurance was always meant to be. It was not punishment. It was positioning. It was the sharpening of your edge in secret, while theirs grew dull with arrogance. Every humiliation you swallowed became fuel, every wound became armor. You did not break, you transformed. Now you watch as justice, cosmic and patient, rewrites the balance, and you finally understand why survival is more powerful than revenge. Revenge is loud and fleeting. Survival is silent and eternal. The lesson presses itself into your bones. No cruelty escapes the ledger. The universe writes slowly, but it writes in ink that cannot be erased. The guilty may outrun witnesses. They may silence their victims, but they cannot outrun the eyes that never close. They cannot silence the law that waits for no prayer. And so the cycle turns again and again, unseen but unstoppable. You feel its truth pulsing beneath your own skin. They thought you were powerless. They thought they had won. But the law was already in motion. And in the end, every secret cruelty becomes a public sentence, always.